This is Sarah, and welcome to my crochet channel. Today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to make my Tutti Frutti baby hat. Now, it can be made in two sizes. There's a newborn to 6 months that is 12 to 13 inches around. And then you can also do the 6 month to 12 months, which is 14 to 15 inches around. Now, it just kind of depends on how tightly you like your hat on your baby. It's meant to be a little bit loose and a little bit like a sun hat. The top is solid, so the top of their head won't get sunburnt, and it has a little brim to help keep the sun off their face. It's the perfect little hat for spring, summer, and fall. Now you can see I've got the Cupcake Caron yarns here, and this is what we're making our Tutti Frutti hat out of. It's a worsted number 3 light yarn, and the Caron Cupcake comes with a pom-pom that's just the perfect size for our little baby hat. Now you can find this pattern on my blog in the notes underneath this video. So what you're going to need to make one of the Tutti Frutti baby hats is some worsted weight number 3 light yarn. You can use a cotton or a worsted weight acrylic. For our demonstration today, we're using the Cupcake yarn from Yarnspirations. And you're going to need a pom-pom, and this Cupcake yarn comes with a pom-pom. A nice string, and I'll show you how to attach that when we get to that point. We're going to be stitching today with our H hook, which is a 5.00 millimeter crochet hook. And of course, you'll need a needle for weaving in your ends and a pair of scissors. To make the hat, we're going to be starting up here, working our way down to the brim of the hat. Now, this hat comes in 2 sizes. The newborn to 3 month size is a 12 to 13 inch hat. The medium to 6 month, which is 6 month to 12 months, is a 14 to 15 inch hat. And remember, all babies' heads are different sizes, so make sure you measure your baby's head and give your hat enough room to slip on and off your baby's head, but you don't want it to fall off either. All right, and I'll explain to you how to make the bigger size when we get there. For the first 3 rows, the hat is done exactly the same for both sizes. So we're going to begin with our slip knot, and we're going to chain 4 chains. Now we're going to place 9 double crochets in the 4th chain from the hook. The first 3 chains will count as 1 double crochet. Yarn over, go in the 4th chain, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through the first 2 loops, yarn over, and go through the last 2 loops. That's our double crochet. So now we have our chain 3 and 1 double crochet, so we need to stitch 8 more, so we have a total of 10 double crochets. And we're stitching right in that same 4th chain. Let me count, see how many that I've stitched. Here's my chain 3, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so now I'm going to join to the top of my chain 3 with a slip stitch, and I'm going to chain 3. So we have 10 double crochets stitched in a circle for row 1. Now for row 2, we want 2 double crochets in each of the double crochets. And my chain 3 counts as 1 double crochet, so I'm just going to put another double crochet in that same stitch, and then I'm going to stitch 2 double crochets in each of the double crochets around. So I'm going to go from 10 to 20. And again, whether you're making the small or the medium size, these first 3 rows are stitched the same. So I'm stitching 2 double crochets in each double crochet around. Let me count to see how many double crochets I've stitched. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. So I need 2 more in this last stitch. I'm going to join to the top of my chain 3 with a slip stitch and chain 3. And this is how your hat should look, whether you're making the small or the medium, for the first 2 rows. For row 3, for both sizes, we're going to stitch again 2 double crochets in each double crochet around. So our chain 3 counts as our first double crochet, and we're going to place 1 double crochet in that first stitch. Then we're going to place 2 double crochets in each double crochet around our hat. And this is going to take us from 20 double crochets to 40. And again, this is for both sizes, the small and the medium. So I'm stitching 2 double crochets in each double crochet around. And I'll keep doing this, moving around for row 3 all the way around. When I get back here, I'll join to the top of my chain 3. I finished double crocheting all the way around, placing 2 double crochets in each stitch. And we needed to go from 10 to 20 to 40 on row 3. We're going to join to the top of that chain 3 with a slip stitch. And we're only going to chain 1 at this point, because I'm going to talk to you now about sizing. For the newborn to 3-month size, this is as wide as the top of the hat is. For the larger size, which is the medium, you're going to need to stitch another row. And that another row, you would chain 3, and then we'd place 1 double crochet in the next stitch, and then 2 double crochets in the next. And repeat that all the way around. 1 double crochet and 2 double crochets in the next. You would repeat that all the way around for row 4. 1 double crochet in the first, 2 in the next. 1, 2, 1, 2, all the way around. But since we're doing the small size, we're not going to do that row. And we're just going to chain 1. Now, if you were doing the larger size, after you did row 4, you would go to row 5. If you're doing the small size, we just skip row 4 and jump right over to R5. And what we're going to do here is we're going to be working in the front loops of our row. Now, here's our row. If you look on the top, you have loops in the front and loops in the back on the top. And we're only going to be stitching in those front loops. And so what we're going to do is we're going to place 1 single crochet in each of these front loops. So we'll put our hook through, we chained 1, we go to the next stitch and just put our hook through the front loop and stitch a single crochet. And we're going to do this all the way around this hat. And like I said, if you made the bigger size, you'll have that row 4 in there and then do row 5. If you're making the small size, we just skipped row 4 and went right on to row 5. The hat is stitched the same, it's just the bigger size has a few more stitches. So you can see I'm stitching single crochets all the way around, 1 single crochet in each stitch, stitching only in the front loop. And you can see it's making a nice little ridge around our hat. And here's a little secret. The newborn size also fits American Girl dolls. Alrighty, so we're just moving around our hat, stitching 1 single crochet in each single crochet, in each double crochet, only stitching in the front loops. And when we get around, we'll join to that first single crochet. And this is the way it should be looking with that ridge. So we stitched that row of single crochets working in the front loops only. We're going to join to our first single crochet with a slip stitch, and then we're going to chain 3. And what we're going to do on our next row is we're going to work in the back loops of this same row. And I sort of push that row forward that we just stitched so that I can see where those loops are. All right, so we're just going to yarn over, go in that first, there it is, I missed it, back loop and stitch a double crochet. Now you're going to have a little bit of a jog right here, but don't worry, it won't even be noticeable once we get finished. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm stitching a double crochet in the back loop of the row that we just stitched the single crochet row on the front loops. And if you just push it forward, those loops pop right out and you can see them. 1 double crochet in each stitch around. Now remember, you'll have more stitches if you're making the bigger size. If you're making the small size, you're going to have 40 double crochets. And if you're making the medium size, you're going to have 53. And what's going to happen is this is going to be the side of our hat, and this is that little ridge at the top of the hat. It gives it kind of a bucket look, like a bucket hat look. So I'm moving around this row, stitching 1 double crochet in each of the back loops. And when we get back around, we'll join to that first double crochet. And if yours is looking like this, then you're doing it right. So this is the way that your hat should look. And you'll notice there's a little bit of a cross right there. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we stitched 40 or 53, depending on what size hat you're making. We're not going to join to the chain 3 like we usually do. We're going to go over and join to that first double crochet with a slip stitch. And that sort of pulls it down and makes it so that it's not noticeable. All right, so now we're going to chain 3. And on this row, we're going to begin our cluster stitches. So we're going to begin with a cluster stitch in this first double crochet. And the way we stitch a cluster stitch is we yarn over, we go in that stitch, we pull up a loop, yarn over, and only go through the first 2 loops. And you'll have 2 loops left on your hook. We're going to yarn over, go back in that same stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, and only go through those 2 loops. And now you'll have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, go back in that same stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, and go through those 2 loops. You'll now have 4 loops left on your hook. You're going to yarn over and go through all 4 of those. That's our cluster stitch. We're going to chain 2. Then we're going to skip the next 2 double crochets. 1, 2. And then we'll stitch another cluster stitch. Yarn over, go in, yarn over, go through the first 2, yarn over, go in, pull up a loop, yarn over, just go through the first 2. Yarn over, go in, pull up a loop, yarn over, and go through the next 2. Then we'll yarn over and go through all 3. Chain 2. So now we're going to repeat what we did, and this is going to be a row of cluster stitches with chain 2s in between. Yarn over, we're going to skip those stitches. There's our cluster stitch, and chain 2. Skip the next 2 stitches, and we'll stitch a cluster stitch in the next. Chain 2. And this is the way that this row will look. We'll do this all the way, that string out of the way. We'll do this all the way around for this row. So this is how your row of cluster stitches should look. When you've reached back around, we're going to join to the top of this chain 3 with a slip stitch, and then we're going to slip stitch in that cluster stitch, and then we'll slip stitch in the chain 2 space and chain 3. Now we're going to stitch our cluster stitches in each of the chain 2 spaces. So we're going to be right in this chain 2 space, and we'll stitch our cluster stitch. So yarn over, go in the chain 2 space, pull up a loop, go through the first 2, yarn over, go back in there, and now we have the 3 loops. Yarn over, go back in, and then we'll yarn over and go through all 3 and chain 2, and then we'll continue this in each of the chain 2 spaces around. We'll stitch a cluster stitch in the chain 2 space and then chain 2. Chain 2. Cluster stitch in the chain 2 space, whoops, got a little bit of a string there. There we go. And so each one of our cluster stitches will be in a chain 2 space. We'll cluster stitch, chain 2, cluster stitch, chain 2, moving all the way around our hat. So there's my chain 2 and cluster stitch in the next chain 2 space. We'll stitch cluster stitches in each of the chain 2 spaces around. We'll chain 2, working all the way around, and then we'll join to the top of our chain 3. So here's our second row of cluster stitches. And we're going to do again what we did on the previous row. We're going to join to the top of that chain 3 with a slip stitch. We're going to slip stitch in the top of that cluster and then slip stitch to the chain 2 space and chain 3. And I will tell you, the red section on this yarn was longer, but I find it's a little bit difficult to see, so I went ahead and changed colors with the Russian join to the lighter yellow that came right after the red so that you could see what I'm doing just a little bit better. For some reason, red is difficult to film. All right, so let's repeat on this row what we did on the previous row. We're going to stitch a cluster stitch in each of the chain 2 spaces with a chain 2 in between. Whoops, there we go. So there's my cluster stitch, chain 2. We'll go to the next chain 2 space and we'll stitch a cluster stitch. And chain 2. So really what we're doing is just repeating what we did on the previous row. Cluster stitch in the chain 2 space and then a chain 2, working all the way around our hat. Now if you're making the larger hat and you want to do more rows of cluster stitches, that you certainly can. Your baby or whoever you're making this for may have a longer head. But for the newborn size up to 3 months, we're not going to make it any longer. But of course you can if you want to. All right, so we joined to the top of our chain 3 and we're going to just make a chain 1. we're going to place a single crochet in the top of our cluster stitch, and then we're going to place 2 single crochets in the chain 2 space. We're going to stitch a single crochet in the top of the next cluster stitch, and then we're going to stitch 2 single crochets in the chain 2 space. 1 single crochet in the top of the next cluster, and 2 single crochets in the chain 2 space. And we're going to do this all the way around. And if you did this correctly, you should have 40 single crochets for the small size and 53 for the large size. So what we're doing is we're stitching 1 single crochet in the top of our cluster stitch and 2 single crochets in the chain 2 space in between. And we'll do this all the way around this row and then join to the first single crochet. I finished this row of single crochet, again stitching 1 single crochet in the top of each cluster and 2 single crochets in the chain 2 spaces between. Now what we're going to do is we're going to join to the first single crochet, not the chain 1, but the first single crochet with a slip stitch, and then we're going to chain 1. And for this next row, we're going to place 1 single crochet in each single crochet around. So 1 single crochet in each single crochet all the way around, and then we'll join to the first single crochet. So I stitched that row of single crochet all the way around my hat. I'm not going to join in the chain 1. I'm going to join in the first single crochet, and then I'm going to chain 1, and then I'm going to stitch another row of single crochets. And this is just giving us a nice hat band so it stays put on our baby's head. So again, 1 single crochet in each single crochet around. I completed this third row of single crochets. I'm going to join to the top of my first single crochet, and this time I'm going to chain 3. And that's because we're going to add the brim portion to the hat. And how we're going to do that is we're going to stitch 1 double crochet in the next stitch, and then we're going to stitch 2 double crochets in the next. And then we'll repeat that all the way around. 1 double crochet, then 2 double crochets. 1 double crochet, then 2 double crochets. And this is going to cause the edge of the hat to stand up and give us a little bit of a brim edge to our little hat. 1 and 2. 1 double crochet in the next stitch and 2 double crochets in the next stitch. 1 and 1 and 2. And you can already see how it's standing out. And so I'm going to continue working around the edge of this hat, stitching 1 double crochet and then 2 double crochets in the next, all the way around. And when I get back around, I'll join to the top of my chain 3. So this is how the brim on your hat should look. It sticks out just a little bit and it's super cute. Alrighty. I finished the row, 2 double crochets in 1 stitch, 1 in the next, working all the way around. We're going to join to our chain 3 with a slip stitch. There we go, didn't want to get in there. And we're just going to chain 1. The last thing that we're going to do is just put a single crochet edge, and that's just going to help the edge or the brim of the hat to stand up nicely. So we'll just put a single crochet in each stitch around. And you'll notice as you work that as you add that single crochet edge on there, it makes a nice sturdy brim for your hat. So I'm just going to keep on working around, stitching. My yarn has static cling. I'm just going to stitch 1 single crochet in each of those double crochets, working all the way around. Then I'll join to the first single crochet. And we can tie off, weave in our ends, and then add a pom-pom if we want to. I finished up that last row of single crochet. I'm going to join to my first single crochet, cut my yarn, and tie off. I'm going to go over to the next stitch and pull that yarn to the back. And I'm just going to weave it in here a little bit. I'll come back and use a needle in a minute. Alright, so I'm going to weave the tail of that yarn on my needle. And I'm just going to weave it in back and forth. So I'm going to go one way, making sure I weave it in stitches and not in holes. And I usually go one way, then I go back, and then I try to go back another way 3 different times. We'll go ahead and clip that off. And this is the way that your baby hat should look. Now just for comparison, this is the newborn size, and this is the toddler size. So you can see there's a little bit difference in size. The last thing that I wanted to show you is that the Cupcake yarn comes with a pom-pom. And if you want to add the pom-pom like I did on this one, it has these strings. And what I do is I take my hook up through next to those stitches, not the center, but next to it, and I'll pull one of those strings through to the inside. And then I'll go right up next to on the other side across, and I'll grab the other side of that string and I'll pull that in. And then what I do is I want this hat to be washable, but I don't want to wash the pom-pom. And so what I'll do is I'll tie it down and I'll just make a bow. And I'll leave that up inside the hat. That way I can put the hat on my baby or someone else's baby, since my babies are all grown up, and they can wear it. And then if I want to wash this hat, I'll just take the pom-pom off by untying that bow. So this is the newborn to 3-month size, and this is the 6 to 12 month size of my Tutti Frutti baby hat. It's a great hat for summer, for spring, and for fall, and you can make it with a pom-pom or without. And just a note, with the Cupcake yarn, you can make one of each hat. There's enough yarn there to make 2 of this pattern.